I am not an overly formal speaker. I am from New York, so I'll try to slow down for anybody not from New York. I'm just kidding. I live in Baltimore. What's that? Okay. When we moved to California, my wife would just grab me by the ear and make sure that I only crossed at the green and when the little sign was up to move. You can't jaywalk in California. Anyway, I'm your last session for today. I wanted to discuss with you effective energy strategies. Just a quick note about myself so you can see where I'm coming from on this. If you have questions at all whatsoever, please ask. I'd like this to be as interactive as possible. I'd like you to get something out of this. I'd like you to enjoy this. I don't want to lecture, so please, if you have questions, let me know. If I'm not on the vein of what you're looking for and I can answer that, please get to that as well. So I'm the Vice President of Regional Sales for Constellation. We are actually just down the block, or down a few blocks here towards the water. Been in Baltimore since we were part of BG&E. No longer for the last 2 years. They're now only part of Exelon, and we are our own company at this point, and actually $18 billion more valuable than them at the moment. So things seem to have gone not as they expected. I'm in charge of selling electricity in a competitive market. So for those of you that are doing this for a while, you know that in about 19 markets in the US, you can actually buy electricity from somebody other than the utility. You are all probably mostly engineers or pretend to be engineers, play one on television, or hang out with them. So I'm not an engineer. I try to fake it every once in a while, but math was not my strong suit. So stop me if I say anything that's wrong, please. With that said, though, in those 19 markets, you can purchase energy from somebody other than the utility. Pipes and wires are still, as you know, owned by the utilities. I have nothing to do with the plug in the wall, only the spark that comes from the generator. We also sell gas at retail in basically the 46 states that you can in the US. That's been going on even longer than electricity has been deregulated. And then we sell everything that goes along with it these days, what we call our sustainable products, our green products, and all of those things. What I wanted to speak to you today is a little bit about what's going on in the overall market, how that's led to what's happening with regard to setting up a strategy, and hopefully give you an idea of what others are doing, if you will. Just by show of hands, you are all involved with commercial properties or industrial properties? No hands, forget it. Commercial, raise your hands. Industrial, raise your hands. Excellent. Anything else I'm not covering? Yes, sir. Higher education. Okay, great. So the land of mush. So with education, great, fantastic. So that looks a little like a commercial building, but different hours. Oh, good, cool, excellent. Okay, so that's what I want to talk about a bit today. Just one quick thing. So general introduction, give an idea. I wanted to get a lot of information out at once. I don't normally put something down like this, but future of energy, as you know, is rapidly changing. When I've been speaking for the almost 30 years that I've been doing this. I'm actually a lawyer by training. I'm sorry about that. Before that, I actually just worked in a store. My mother wanted me to go to law school, so I did, and then I got out as quickly as I could, and I enjoyed sales a lot more than that, and that is actually the truth. And my wife's a shrink, so I'm still working on that as well. But the future of energy is to the point where I used to give a normal talk about here's what we can do, here's what we can save you, and then President Obama came in many, many years ago and said something to the effect of, I think that everybody should be buying some sort of sustainable, green, use whatever word you want as a portion of your energy. And everybody panicked. Because if everybody in the US, as a result of that, would have bought a percentage of what they were buying, and it was going to be qualified as green or sustainable or renewable, didn't exist. We didn't have enough for everybody. Kind of like what's going on in California now, where the governor says everyone's going to have an electric car. That's great. You can either charge your car, wash your clothes, turn on your lights, or run street lights. There's just not enough power in California to do that. So when President Obama said that, everybody freaked out because you started running numbers and you run all these models and you realize that, okay, the lucky people that get some green power, it's going to be about 75,000 times the price of what they were paying now because just straight supply and demand, the demand for it would be crazy and the supply was low and fixed. Or you wouldn't get anything, and who knew what was going to happen? I started making that presentation, as you can imagine, when President Obama took office. It never happened. So as a result, oddly enough, the green markets have grown, and you do have more access to sustainable power, and we're going to discuss that because that has had the biggest effect on the ability to make sound energy decisions and to plan. The best line I think I ever heard was there was a whole craze on everybody going green, US government, no, state governments, etc. But suddenly prices went up. And one of our bigger customers was a very well-known defense contractor. And he always told me, initially, they were looking for green power. And then he said, I'm only looking for double green. I said, what's double green? Well, it's got to be green, and it has to help me in the green department in terms of money. And the second thing just wasn't there anymore because the price has gone up so much that he couldn't make budget. So I had customers that were not necessarily looking for sustainable buys anymore. The government had almost cornered the market by just requiring 10% at some point. So we've had to catch up. And that's where you see the growth of more windmills, the growth of more battery storage, and everything else. And I'll give you an idea of what's happening as well. Finally, also, what's the push for all of this stuff? Now everybody uses the terms reducing carbon emissions. Everybody's come up with different terms for green power. Sustainability, green, renewable energy credits. Now everything's carbon free. It's all basically the same to some extent, except for my company, the nice thing is, and we'll get into this also a little later, carbon free actually applies to nuclear power, which for us is a good thing. I'm sorry? Amen, yes. Too bad we can't build any more, but yes. Nuclear power plants have now become clean energy centers, not just for Constellation, but for others. And there's a lot going on, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Okay, the reason I put up just a straight graph is it's missing an X and Y axis, but the only thing I want anybody to look at, let's see if this works, it's just that little blip over there. And basically what that's showing is even though we had demand basically, as my chief economist would say, you want to see a 45-degree angle in one direction, either going down or going up to set a trend of some sort. Not mathematically perfect, but what we see down there is that last little blip is showing electricity demand in the US increasing. So one would think, with all of the efficiencies and all of the new refrigerators we're buying and all of the new light bulbs that you've been forced to buy over all the years, that it would be continuing to go down. But that didn't take into account, as we talked about in the beginning, electric vehicles and something even more crazy than that. It rhymes with data centers. Data centers. The usage and the growth of data centers. There was an article a few weeks ago that one of the largest high-tech companies, which you all know well, is basically building the equivalent of a data center a day right now, just because of what's going on right now with the need for storage, internet requirements, cloud requirements, and everything else, literally a day. And when you see these things, if you don't have them already, your companies or where you are, if you're renting space in somebody else's, these facilities are massive. And they require not just the power to run the data center, but they require the power to do backup and the power for cooling. So there's backup, there's cooling, and then there's the actual usage that's going on. The size of these things is literally portions of existing power plants at this point, and there are more of them. Just as a side note, everybody remember that Bitcoin stuff? It's actually going up, but there's that Bitcoin stuff. For a while, they were calling us because they wanted to get as close as possible to a power plant, because the whole idea of the way they operate and the way the strings work in blockchain, the higher the level of power that you have, the cheaper that it is, eliminating transmission costs, and that you know is completely reliable, you actually can make more money as a result of the mining operation. So they were calling myself and all the people in my industry, trying to literally locate the equivalent of an extension cord plugged into a power plant, just to see if they could get things faster and get it done at a more reliable level. Didn't happen because they were only going to pay in cash, and that's a bit of an odd business. So here's a bit of a breakdown on what's going on. This is talking about the whole idea of what's happening with decarbonization. I want to just kind of ground everybody in what's happening here. So 25 states already have greenhouse gas, clean energy goals. 40 million people, or 12% of the population, live in cities in the US that have climate action plans, which is a euphemism for, by the way, we're going to be this percent green by this year. Neither good nor bad, just is. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning, which increases demand over time. And the question is, will supply keep up? And you're all here to talk about how you're putting together energy plans. The question is that you should be thinking about is, what are the requirements, if any, within your businesses to put in sustainable power or not? And what are your budgetary requirements? And when do those two of them either work in harmony or they conflict to some extent? And how are you going to deal with that? Federal government will procure 100% carbon pollution-free 24/7 electricity by 2030. The key word in there is 24/7. 24/7 means that at night, when the sun isn't shining, or on an odd day in Texas when there's no wind, you still have to procure green power. Where's it coming from? If they let you. Yes. So the storage, that's our fancy word for batteries. The storage is getting filled up with extra that's coming off of windmills, that's coming out of waterfalls, with hydroelectric, that's coming off of nuclear if it's accepted in that market. Obviously it can run all the time, but they're sending it there as well. What's filling up the batteries, and does that market allow for that to fill up the batteries? Separate rules, each market, not governed necessarily at a federal level. 2/3 of car sales will be electric by 2040. Mr. Pickens, before he passed away, was betting on natural gas. Remember, they were gonna, every truck was gonna be natural gas. They were setting up stations everywhere. What happened to that? Natural gas still potentially is cheaper, and I sell electricity, but it still potentially is cheaper for those engines. So there were trucks that converted. We actually had invested in LNG gas stations for them to do that. It's very interesting how that completely dropped off the map. 600 local governments have climate action plans. Same effect as what it has from the state level. 60% of the Fortune 500, that's 300 companies, one of which is mine, have set climate and energy goals. Once again, all of this means increased demand for the same things that you need for your business, regardless of the size. $100 billion is needed for energy invested to reach 90% of energy requirements by 2035. Thank you. And U.S. greenhouse reduction target of 50 to 52% by 2030. So if you take that as a straight line across every business potentially in the U.S., you start to realize what's going to happen potentially to prices, to your budgets, and to requirements. So everybody can be in favor of sustainable power, of which I am. My company is very active in this, but you also have to understand what the budget affecting is and what the planning effect is for all of this. Finally, I'm not going to make you read all of these, but a few of them that are interesting is looking at what specific companies are doing right now that are competing with you for the limited resources that are green. Bloomberg targets to become the first one to shop for sustainability data. They want to be a one-stop shop for the data. So they're going to want to buy your data from you to put it all together from a benchmarking perspective so that people can create best practices, the same way they do for stock markets all over the world right now. State Department's Clean Energy Demand Initiative is bringing corporations and countries together in pursuit of their climate and energy goals. Once there's standardization, as is was with Tokyo and with Paris, those numbers tend to go up, which will increase the requirements, which over time will eventually settle out, but initially could potentially increase prices of what you're looking for. So you have to figure out what you're doing from a planning perspective as well. And then finally, over 200 companies have signed climate pledge to reach terms of the Paris Agreement by 10 years early. So depending where you are, so being a larger company, we have to actually watch what we're doing from a press perspective as well as a business perspective. So you have the requirements of what people are expecting, what NGOs expect. If you have a company that has locations in Europe, I have a lot of customers that are industrial customers that have European locations or Chinese locations or Taiwanese locations. Depending where the influences are coming from, that ends up affecting what it is that you're expecting to do here in the US. So that was the oddity with the US defense contractor, not knowing what to do and who they're competing with as to what they were going to do. If you get a flight right now in the US, usually a US carrier may or may not tell you about carbon displacement. If you book a flight to Europe, you'll see a little line about carbon displacement. You'll see a little line telling you whether you can buy something, if you want to buy credits for something. It's a whole different world. Flights, hotels, buses, any tickets that you're purchasing. Right. Excellent. Excellent. There are two things financially that come out of that. The first one is what you described, which is your capacity charge. You're paying on your bill the capacity charge, which is whatever the most power is that you took. Power comes in two flavors, as you all know. The size of the pipe, which is your demand charge, and then how much is flowing through it, which is your load profile, right? So if you're as I always say, if you're a 7-Eleven, right, your size is whatever it is for that little store, but your load profile is at 100% because it's open all the time, and it's flowing at 100% as your profile, if you will, your load factor, your load factor is running at 100%. So the demand is what they have to keep at the pole for you at all times, which is what you're paying for that capacity that's being described. Right. The other piece of what you're saying is the popularity now of what we're calling behind the fence generation. So where a facility will have their own solar, and basically what it's doing, for all intents and purposes, is spinning the meter in the other direction. It was free. Employee of the month. Yes, he did. So we have a ringer. We have good trading questions. Thank you. Thank you. So when you have a roadmap and you're thinking about your solutions, the questions become is support for carbon-free generation. What are your companies, your businesses thinking about? Simplifying your energy solutions and managing your price risk. Meaning, are you purchasing electricity in a regulated state and therefore you're on a tariff and you know what you're going to be paying? Are you in a deregulated state? You could purchase on a contract that's either what we call full requirements, which is Doritos basically, don't worry, we'll make more. Or are you buying on something that we'll call more of a block and index combination, where you're buying some fixed price power and you're buying on the market as well. The more that you buy on the market, the increased level of risk. But when you're looking at your path, have you done anything from an efficiency perspective? On a most basic level, your lighting. Are you looking at the load in your buildings? Have you decreased it in somehow with an efficiency measure? Are you required to do some sort of RECs, which are renewable energy credits in some way, shape, or form? Are you buying any carbon-free power as a requirement? Are you buying renewables? Those are all almost synonyms, but they're in different flavors and different prices. And the reason they all exist is what you may be required to do by your businesses. Some businesses duplicating your European model will have to buy something so official that has a stamp on it. This was official, it came from here, this is what we did, this is what we displaced. As opposed to, I'll talk later about something coming off of a nuclear site that will be able to give you something called an effect, which will give you the same effect, if you will, but it won't necessarily be official as per other standards, but you can feel good that you're taking something that's carbon free. And then you have carbon accounting, you understand, well, we'll talk about this a bit more, but I wanted to take a check here of, I'm leading you down a path of understanding what you're going to be doing to put together that strategy for either efficiency, for savings, or potentially for both, depending on where the market is. Over time, where are we right now? Right now, most people are dealing with more advanced analytics of their energy. It's not just looking at your gas bill and electric bill, which you all know, it hasn't been that way for a while, but you're also taking into account in some cases, where is your power actually coming from? Some of you might even have to deal with renewable natural gas. There's an entire market for that right now. It's not just sticking a pipe into a cow pasture. There are other ways that it's being done. There is now a market for RNG, and a lot of people are required to buy that as well. Methane, that's the euphemism for it. Yes. Yes. How much do I owe you at the end of the speech? Thank you, you're correct, but you know that. Then coming up is the battery and storage that we discussed about, but more analytics and AI. So artificial intelligence is everywhere, as you know. What's happening now in this middle section is the same way that you have building energy management systems that are giving you an idea of when things are being phased in, phased out. Maybe you're turning off elevator banks. Maybe you're not using a fountain or something that's a draw of some sort on a hot day. The analytics now can actually, as we were talking about a second ago, turn on the batteries at night automatically. Or, as we were saying, we get a cloudy day, automatically goes to storage or goes back to the grid. AI asks all of these, you're all engine, and Boolean statements. If cloudy, then battery. If cloudy, then back on the grid. All of these things are being programmed now at a level that they haven't been before. And the crazy thing is, for those of you that have any interest in AI whatsoever, is you don't need to have necessarily a degree in programming anymore. Microsoft has made it that you can basically go normal, simple language and almost write 60% of a program at this point, and then hire somebody else to do it, or they'll help you with it. It's unbelievable what you can put together, the if, thens, etc., as to what you can do for planning. Finally, what's coming up is the whole world of hydrogen. So we talked about electric vehicles. Next is hydrogen vehicles. A bit of the hydrogen stuff got cooled off, if you will, with the latest stuff coming out of the White House. Remains to be seen what happens. But what's going to happen is, how is the hydrogen being made? SMRs are for the mini nukes that Rolls-Royce and others are making. That, in my opinion, is probably the only thing that we might see here. Because to build a new nuclear plant in this country at this point, first of all, there's nobody to build one. I don't think there's anybody left that actually is still working that actually built a nuclear plant in this country. Like literally built it from the ground up. So you're bringing in people from Jakarta or France or other places, or you find somebody that was in the Navy or in Merchant Marine or anything else that actually knows what they're doing still. but they don't have the people to actually do these things. And then you look at the price. So I think when they looked at what the price to build brand new right now, I think it's well over $20 billion. And that's potentially 2,000 megawatts. So what is happening though, and I think you'll appreciate this if you have this background, is everybody's basically increasing the efficiency levels of the plants. So you can take a plant that's running at 2,000 megawatts and potentially get another, you can get another 10 to 15% out of it as long as you get it re-upped and relicensed. It's an amazing thing actually. That I don't know. But if you're saying it, then you must be right. All I know is when my father-in-law moved to California and they put up San Onofre, he remembers reading the articles that said power was going to be free. And then they shut it down. Yeah. The market for hydrogen also, it's a dual market. So you have the normal gas market right now for hydrogen gas, carbon dioxide, all of the gases that are sold by Air Liquide, natural gas, all of those companies. What they're looking for now is the hydrogen that's produced with green power. That then becomes green hydrogen, which has a value to it and also potentially has a credit to it. That's a little harder. They were trying to do it off of the nukes or off of the renewable sites to then produce there with electrolyzer. Good. Fracking? Can you frack for hydrogen? Nah, I don't know. Okay, this gives a picture of somebody's building here to kind of push it all together. So when you're looking at an integrated value proposition for any sustainability goals you might have, this is literally looking just at sustainability goals. You want to think about what you're using for power and natural gas. You want to think about whether you need or have on-site generation. Are you doing anything for efficiency upgrades, which we discussed? Are you leveraging anything in the market? Are you doing something that allows you to understand what's happening with pricing in the market, with market monitoring, with the gas market, the electric market? Are you buying something on index? How are you planning for that? And are you required, as we said, to in any way put in renewables, RECs? EFECs are the equivalent of RECs coming off of a nuclear facility. You can get credit for that depending on what your requirements are, but that's the equivalent of having something greened up a bit. It's like getting a side salad with your power. It can be an EFEC. Those are specific to the PJM market, which are in here, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, because we have a high number of nukes that are here, and that's something that's available. And then eventually you're looking at taking your commodity risk management, overall spend, all of your goals, and then at the end, what you're looking for is potential business value and a plan. So I put this in just to kind of, once again, ground us as to what's going on in the world. Whether you agree, disagree, doesn't matter. This is the discussion that's happening. And this is what's driving a lot of markets. The idea of climate change, the idea of global warming, whichever term is being used at the moment, that's what's driving a lot of the markets. We're affecting what we're discussing here, which is your overall pricing and budget. So this is what I wanted to show you when we started out. The growth alone, just from data centers, these are all different opinions on where the growth could go from different investment groups and different monitoring services, goes all the way up to potentially 235%, right? And that's looking at levels from 2 years ago to potentially 2030. When was the last time anyone discussed that there was a higher demand for electricity in the US? When many of us were growing up, everything was efficient. You can't even buy a normal light bulb anymore, right? And last time I looked, nobody's appliance lasts beyond a few years because of all the chips that are in there, everything else. Once again, not good or bad, just what's next. As a result of all these things, one would have thought if I put a blindfold on you, we're using electricity, less electricity in the US. That would seem to make sense. But if you're building a minimum of a data center a day, just one company, that requirement and that growth for those pizza boxes that are in those data centers is insane. That is in my business, one of the biggest things we deal with right now are the large companies that you know in California that are busy calling and trying to figure out where they're going to build their next data center, how they're going to do it, where the power is coming from, and how that's going to happen, unless somebody personally buys San Onofre and uses it privately. But just look at that potential increase just over an 8-year period. And I have something a bit more specific on small numbers, which is just breaking it down in those periods. That's just growth, if you will. So just in 23, we saw a 4.5% increase in the growth of data centers. And that's 4.5% of a huge number to start with. That is probably the single biggest load growth thing that's happening. And I say it more so probably than EVs, although I don't know for sure, because the EV market goes up and down. This has been constant. And I think everything we're seeing, it's just going to keep growing. This is what's next. You'd be surprised where they're asking to be. There you go. Why do you think? I don't know why. Why do you think? Yeah, because if you think about it, everybody was at home using Netflix, so if anything, they needed them. Yeah. So once again, back on what's happening from a climate perspective. This is just letting you know that organizations right now are setting up profiles and initiatives for greenhouse gas emissions. They're basically discussing it with various NGOs, with governments, with private companies, so that eventually to some level there's either a standardization level, there's everybody outdoing people. Once again, neither good nor bad. This is just what's happening. The effect is one from a supply and demand perspective. And as a result, as you're building your energy plan, as you're planning out, normally 20 years ago, one would have said, okay, next year I need to reduce my budget by X. I'll reduce my budget by X. Now, when you're looking at prices for power and for gas, although gas is low at the moment, there's other prices if you're required to buy something sustainable that might be going up. You might have a lower energy market right now in New England, as an example, but capacity charges might be higher. Renewable portfolio standards, which is another way of saying you're paying us for the next level of green power that we're going to be buying or setting up, those are going up. Your overall cost in the end could still be higher, even though you're saying, but natural gas is down. Isn't that what the plants are running on? Yes, but these are the other pieces that raise prices. Why or is? Based on just the fact that supply is high at the moment. There's a lot in the ground. They've been injecting. They injected all summer. They didn't pull as much in the winter because overall, although it was cold in some places, not to the level of what we've had in the past. As a result, there's a high supply right now. To the extent where they're actually not pulling natural gas out in some places. A few weeks ago, Chesapeake announced that they were going to stop producing for a little while at a few of their sites because the price was too low. Yeah. But they're not pumping in as many pumps at the moment. So there were two things. The LNG effect is an interesting one. It affects the U.S. price, but not as much as we think. So where we would be paying between $2 and $3, that same stuff being liquefied and sent somewhere else was between $8 to $12. That was one thing. The other issue was where people just stopped supplying to some extent. Fracking was placed in danger in some markets. The price went up, but then it came screaming down. So it's up for a little while. Also, the credit crunch for some reason affected gas prices, if you remember the 2008 run as well. Gas right now is at a level where people think there's more upside than downside, meaning the price can go up more than it can go down. But at least looking into the future right now, the movement isn't that great, at least in the future strips at the moment out for a few years. So I'm not a trader and I don't know. We could have it over here, but at the moment, at least from a supply-demand perspective, the prices look as if they can maintain where they are, depending on anything. I don't know. I think it's exactly the same. Favorable is kind of a hard word to use. It exists when the price exists for it. As an example, when they were pulling gas out of the tar sands, or oil out of tar sands, they were only doing it when the price per barrel was at a certain level. If the price per barrel came down, they couldn't cover their costs. So it's the same thing with natural gas. If the price is too low, you start to see things shutting down until the price comes back up. No, thank you. So this is very interesting. Just get close to this for a second. This is basically looking at the number of customer deals that are being used for green power right now, for clean energy. So in gigawatts, in 2022, 16.9 gigs on almost 150 deals. In 2014, nobody even knew what they were buying back then. I don't even know who was doing that in 2014. Slight dip over here in 2023, not sure why, but the overall thing, once again, the 45-degree angle that we see. These are companies that are investing in and buying green gigawatts, which is a lot. And then finally, from a supply-demand perspective, the interesting thing here is over here is the percent of corporate PPAs, those are power purchase agreements, secured by the top 5 buyers. So 5 buyers, if you will, would have been purchasing need this right now in the US. This is how much of that, right? So almost 10 of 17, right? Roughly 2/3, if you will, give or take, is already something where they're buying power purchase agreements, which means they're not buying it from the normal sites on the grid. So that could be a Google, that could be an Amazon, that could be a Microsoft, that could be a Kroger, but they're not even close to what the requirements are for others. Yes, sir. Yeah, these are megawatts. The scale is, so in 2022, the top 5 energy users in the US would have been buying roughly 17 megawatts of power. Of that 17 megawatts that they would have been purchasing, almost 10 of them were already coming from private power purchase agreements. So they normally would have been purchasing it on the grid from the utility or from somebody that's deregulated. Now they've contracted for a private windmill, anything else like that. Did that answer your question? Yeah, right. So what you're looking at here is a pure subset with a point being made of the largest users. But yes, if you were to take all power purchase agreements, yes, 100%. Yeah, you're completely correct. Right. They're gonna, if they need it, they're gonna glom on to somebody else's project and get what's left, or they can't meet their requirements if they're trying to hit them. Then finally, I talked about this. So for us, we've renamed our nuclear plants clean energy centers. I believe other people are doing that as well. To be honest with you, it's an amazing thing. It's marketing to some extent to call it that, but it is an amazing thing because the recognition that you've had under your nose the entire time, nuclear power, which is carbon-free, which runs safely when done properly, when operated properly, which we do as a company. But this basically is all of these things right now and more. So up there, producing hydrogen, methanol, e-ammonia, then running data centers. All people want to do is get as close as possible with a nice orange extension cord to the source of power and potentially carbon-free power. Direct air capture, which is discussed with hydrogen and with other gases that they're doing. And then the flexibility for being able to supply 24/7. So the only thing that's already on the grid that supplies at night, if you're not buying battery storage, is a nuclear facility at the moment. Because you don't know if the water's running, you hope it is, fine, hydroelectric at some point. But from another perspective, at night, if you want to say you're carbon free, you want to be able to track what you're doing back to a nuclear plant in most cases. Well, they shut down San Onofre in California. We threatened as a company with our other owner in Chicago, in the Illinois area. They ended up not doing it. They're amazing sources of jobs. They're an amazing source of baseload power. It should be less expensive depending on regulation. So hopefully they stay open along with other things. Just something to be said about the hourly carbon free. To be able to look at something from an hourly basis, basically you need data, you need procurement, you need policy. All of these things, if you're required at some point in the future to buy all of your power as green all day, every day, it's not just going to be plugging it in. It's going to be looking to see what data do you have, the AI placement, everything else that's needed to make sure that occurs. It's really just the challenge that are involved right now. One of the biggest ones is pricing. Sometimes when you're looking at storage, it can be up to $200 a megawatt hour. Prices should only be about $50 a megawatt hour. But if you want to have storage and you want to have batteries in place, the pricing is the biggest thing on maintaining things that are off hours, if you will, or as we said, if the sun's not shining or if the wind's not blowing. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about some strategies that exist. Some of them are things that you know about, others might be helpful, but my goal is trying to get you to a level of where you feel a little more comfortable or you have something to add to plans that you're already doing. Okay. In general, where we've placed things right now are some things that are old and some things that are new. Old for you, bill management. Are you on the right tariff? Have you taken advantage of everything your utility is offering you? Do you have a process in place to do that? I'm sorry if I'm insulting people that have been doing this for the last 20 or 30 years, but it still is something that makes sense because between gas and electric and now water, there's a lot of money to be found in Denbar Hills. And there's still good demand management programs that you can do if you're looking for peak opportunities in the summertime. People will shut down on what they think are the 5 peak days in most markets, and they will get a lower demand charge. That is almost 40% of your bill in some markets and can make a bigger dent than anything else in some cases. Rebate management. Are you in a market where there's a rebate available for anything that you're doing, and have you looked into it? Carbon accounting. Do you know or must you know what is your carbon footprint? What is your greenhouse gas emissions? What reporting is required of you? All of this exists now with programs that you can buy or manage based on your usage or based on your bill input. Does your company has any sort of advisory team with regards to sustainability? Do you need one? Are you looking at anything? Is this a potential requirement going forward? And then in general, is your energy program a huge part of your budget, a low part of your budget? If it's a big part of your budget, how active are you in it? Because depending on what you're doing in your company, if you're active and it's a big requirement, somebody's looking at it and seeing everything that's happening right now. So it's in the news almost every day to some extent, which you know. Carbon accounting. I'm not going to go through all of this. It's just an example of what's happening right now. You can basically establish baselines, climate targets, roadmaps to basically set in what your current usage is. They'll usually ask for a year's worth of bills, maybe many more, answer questions, begin the tracking process. It can produce for you the reports that are required in either some markets. If you're a public company, sometimes they're required. There are programs that do this. They're excellent. They're excellent. They actually come up with very good numbers now. It's not, you can offset it with purchasing a forest somewhere. It actually explains to you how you're operating, what things you can do. The more technical and the more specific you are from a business perspective, the more it can actually tell you. The programs that are around now are excellent. Rebates management. What's old is new. There are people that track now. We have a company that does it. Others do this. It's not just the whole idea of, just checking in with your utility rep. If some of you have locations in other places, there are programs now that track everything that's being offered and in some cases match up where you are, what's being offered, and what can happen. It's not just knock, 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 I'm going to put in new light bulbs and by the way, you'll get some money back from the utility. That's the basics at the moment. There's updates for everything from HVACs, which you're aware of, changing out pipes, changing out the ballast lighting you all know about. But all of those things often have rebates attached to them, or you find about the rebate ahead of time. Sometimes there's financing available. That can be done. The secondary piece, though, is then programming that in from an efficiency perspective and finding out what your budget is going to be from a lower perspective, depending on how you purchased it. So if you change lighting, HVAC, and a few other things, and that reduces your usage by 15%, is that being modeled properly? And does the model show you any price increases that are happening with everything else going on in your market that you're in? I hope that makes sense. Are you required to buy RECs? If you are, how often are you buying them? The price of RECs is quite liquid. Is fluid, meaning supply and demand on RECs really move those prices up and down on a regular basis. So if all you're required to do for a company is have a renewable energy credit, depending on whether you want it official, unofficial, with a tax credit, without a tax credit, the prices can vary. These are if you're required to do it, or if your company or facility or anybody else wants to purchase them. These are things you want to plan for. It's not just an immediate purchase. You want to plan for them, see where the markets are, because they are very, very fluid markets from the perspective of where the prices are. They don't yet necessarily correspond to a straight supply-demand type situation. Traders are involved a lot in how these prices are looking. Green E-REC is where, yes, it certifies it. It basically lets you pay extra so that it's certified with a nameplate. So you know that you're not just getting a REC that's national, if you will. It's coming from this wind facility in this state, even though you're not connected with an extension cord on the grid, you have caused that megawatt hour, that kilowatt hour to enter the grid. You have paid for it, if you will. You're entitled to a certified renewable energy credit that's certified by that group. saying that it is, as opposed to stuff's gone on the market, we're contributing, if you will, to do it, but it's less expensive. So the more words in front of the word rec, the more expensive it is. But it's really what's required, because a lot of companies require that, businesses do, and people expect it for accounting. If you're at Whole Foods, you want to be able to show in your annual report, this is what you're doing, because that's part of your marketing plan. That's part of what's happening. So we see all different flavors, literally. Once again, this I should have taken out because it's repetitive, but it's what I had said before, of all the pieces that go into the technologies and all the things that you should be looking from a checklist perspective. It's actually a very good checklist from what you should be thinking about in terms of your facilities. Advisory services. So this is what's new. If you don't have consultants knocking on your door, they want to, or maybe they'll eventually get to you. But everything that we're talking about right now, consultants can handle. The good news is that in this industry, there are a lot of software programs that you either work with yourself or bring somebody in to do it for less than it is for bringing in a traditional consulting level thing for a big business problem that you're solving. We have a group that does this, others do this. They basically look at normalizing your data, setting goals, putting the reports together if you're required to do things, and setting up an ongoing plan, if you will. You can do a trailing 12 months, a future 12 months. You can look at a 5-year plan and add the next year on each time, so that if you have sustainability goals, you can actually set them without saying, hey, by 2030, I think I'll be using half. Well, how are you going to get there? If you don't have a plan in place and you don't actually see that it can be done, because somewhere in there, you might have to replace lots of things. If you're a manufacturing facility, you might have to replace a lot of machines. If you don't know in line what's happening, you could end up missing those goals, which for some people is a problem. Final thoughts. Sustainable practices can actually lead to a more profitable company. If you think about some of the things we talked about here, efficiency programs you all know about, but if you're being more efficient, you're using less power. But if prices are going up anyway, are you using somebody that at least helps you understand where prices are and where the purchases should be made? Like, hey, capacity is going up, buy now, don't buy in 2 years. Get a longer term contract. Pass through things, don't pass through things. Gas is at a good price. Maybe we should take winter of the next 2 years off the table at this point, maybe not. Hey, looks like we're planning and we need to set off 15% of our take with some sort of green power purchase. Do we wait till the last minute? Do we purchase it now? How is your profitability actually being measured at that point? Do you need to have these sustainable requirements to be considered a going concern? All of these things are legitimate questions so that you actually can affect your profitability. I believe that these sustainable practices are here to stay. The US has fought some of them to some extent. Others, we've done a better job of basically getting across the goal line. The acceptance of nuclear power as carbon-free came across with the Inflation Reduction Act. That was a big deal to actually keep the nukes running, as was brought up before. They almost closed. And as a result of getting the money in there, basically a bill that allowed a minimum take on them, it basically kept our baseload power going. Anybody that knew businesses that were in Western Europe, specifically Germany, we've seen stuff come back here because they basically said, we're not using our baseload power anymore. They shut stuff down and they were producing it 3 times our cost. So we saw manufacturers come back. Toledo, Ohio had a renaissance because stuff came back from either Europe or from China in some cases because our prices actually came down and the efficiencies came up. So as you're planning for what you're doing, this is a lot of what you should be thinking about. And that's it. I'm getting your beer garden 13 minutes early. Any questions? Yeah, a question, thank you. Right. So the easy answer is a sustainability advisor extremely helpful, or having some carbon accounting, it'll list for you and ask you what you're doing. With that said though, as was said with like what's the purpose of a greenie rec that's official or unofficial, if you look inside of them, they'll give you the qualities that are there. We have a report, and so do all the people in my industry, where we have to report where the sources are for power, if you will. But if you work down the way, the highest quality in a lot of markets is literally an extension cord to a solar panel that's on your roof, and then a battery that's running at night that was filled up by the solar panel, as a potential example. You know that there are windmills in your area, you've contracted with to take, etc., maybe officially, unofficially, high level. It begins to degrade from there if you're looking at not so much the quality, but what it can be used for and NGO acceptance. A good place to look is like World Resource Fund or others to see what people are pushing from a Paris or a Tokyo perspective as, can't use that, you have to use this. Does that help? 100%. Yes, yes. But I will say this, a lot of the quote-unquote greenwashing, it's a start. Over the years that I've been doing this, the people that were early adapters in green, they didn't have a lot of choices. So what they bought when they thought they were being great, we now say, that's greenwashing. But they didn't mean to do that when they initially bought it. It's a matter of, did you grade up as you're asking? And some people did. Some people did, because that's why the demand is there and that's why the actual building is happening. It's a great question. Anybody else? Yes? What do you think the answer is? Yeah. Right, so in our national group, we'll see, they call it Fortune 500 types, we'll see many more requests, if you will. But how many people actually contract in the end? Fewer sometimes, depending on the price of what they're looking at and why they want to buy it. On a regional customer level, which is more medium-sized customers, bread and butter, average users in the US, I think probably slightly higher than what you're saying, but we'll see more so people that are doing it either for they want to, they're required to, it's expected. So they want to, hey, we should do something, it feels like the right thing. They're required to is we, US government, must buy X percent. We, facility that serves a municipal facility, must do this. Marketing. You expect when you walk into, and I don't know this for sure, you expect if you walk into Whole Foods, I would assume, you hope in your mind that that spray that's coming out is being charged by something that's coming from a nice place, if you will. So that from a marketing perspective, a lot of people also drive that. So when you see the larger users now for data centers, the goal of a data center right now, depending on who's building it, is give it to me as big as possible, let me grow it as much as possible, and for goodness sake, please figure out a way that it could all be carbon-free forever. So which comes down to, how do I get an extension cord into a nuclear facility? Or at least somebody hypothetically asking that question. Because there aren't enough windmills right now for all of them. It's very hard. And then there's the backup as well. So does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just brown. We'll just say brown power. Price went up, yeah. It's come down a bit, yes. Yes. Right, I tried to get a chart that showed exactly what you're saying, which is what right now is the tracking of the two lines of expected demand growth based on EV requirements for charging and let's say data centers versus ability to build more and more green. And if I remember correctly, the discussions that I've heard, and this is just personally saying this, so don't take this officially, I believe that the demand outstrips the supply for a while until it potentially catches up. The challenge with it catching up is what happens to baseload power. Because some of it displaces people that would have been officially using baseload power. That's why, as an initial thing, they put together programs for nukes and for other things to make sure baseload continues. Yes, sir? Yes. Yes. Great question. So the question comes down to how are you looking at the ROI and what you've done. So if you're looking at it as a straight up investment, we're going to own it. We've done as an example, we redid our roof on our warehouse as part of our business. We put all the solar up there. It displaces 30% of our load, paid for it, done, start on day one fresh, then you're good. But if you're looking at, well, what's the ROI? When am I going to need to replace them? Are they going to need to be replaced before I pay them off? Am I part of something? Did I actually rent them? Did I lease them? What did I do for them? Then the numbers start to not look as good. And what ends up happening is you're officially getting green, which is great, but financially you're not necessarily saving any money. So it depends whether you're gonna, it's almost the same as leasing a car to some extent. You know, you're paying the $700 a month, or you just buy the car and that's it, you're driving. So that's what, does that help? Yeah, great question, great question. And I see people that do it both ways. And it's the same on residential level also. You know, everybody, I don't have solar on my roof. So people ask me, hey, you're in the business, why don't you? I say, well, I look at it from a return investment perspective, and just in the time I've been looking at it, they've upgraded photovoltaics like 6 times. So if I would have done it on day one, I'm already behind, like the equivalent of still having an iPhone 1 in my pocket, and it's only been a few years. Yes. It does for the most part. The issue with community solar is it's often backed up with some regulatory moves. And if you have some rules in place that make it economic, no matter how it's happening, either with incentives of some sort or tax advantages of some sort, then the numbers tend to work out. If it's just straight up and you're literally paying for the equivalent of what would have been on your roof, but you're renting it in the community place, then you have to work out the amount. But it's a wonderful solution though, because it does what you're saying, which is I might not have the right roof, I don't want to give up my backyard, this is the right move to make. But it does have backups usually from a regulatory perspective in this community. But it's growing. The growth of community solar now is probably the biggest growth in solar I've ever seen. Yeah. Yeah. We are at 5:15. We have 5 minutes, or I can let you go. If there are more questions, I can hang out up here if you have anything. Okay? It was very nice meeting everybody. Thank you.